The Drum, the Doll, and the Zombie by Brad Strickland and John Bellairs. Chapter 14. Johnny struggled to lose the rope that tied his hands beside him, on the back seat of the cold, rusty old Ford. Fergie was writhing, too. Night had fallen. Todd Lamort drove his rickety car, and in the front passenger seat sat his grandmother, the evil Mama Sinestra. All that day, Johnny and Fergie had been locked in a chilly, windowless room of the ramshackle old farmhouse. They had tried to think of a way of escape, but none had come to them. Fergie discovered, however, that he could press his head against one of the walls and hear their captors talking on the other side. That was how the boys knew what lay before them tonight. Fergie had heard Lamort's side of a telephone conversation with Professor Childermass. From the sound of it, the boys' captors were bargaining for something that they wanted in exchange for Johnny and Fergie. They wanted the professor to bring the drum to the farmhouse, but the old man must have balked at the idea. Finally, Lamort agreed to meet Professor Childermass somewhere else. After the phone conversation was over, Fergie heard some chilling words. First, Lamort laughed in a nasty way. The old fool chose the place where you found your servant. What an idiot he is. He really thinks he will make the exchange and then let him and those other two brats go free. He really thinks we will make the exchange and then let him and those two brats go free, he had said. And with an angry laugh of her own, his grandmother answered, Then he is vast in a fool. I think perhaps tonight we will gain more good servants, my grandson? Hard time we killed our enemies. I would never have handled things the way you did, returned Lamort. You sent that old fool into a coma, and then you made me sit by his side day after day just in case he talked. I would have used the power of magic to force him to talk. The old woman fairly snarled. You ambitious young fool! We are in a strange place, and our powers are not at their strongest here. What good would it do to torture the old man if torture would kill him? Then where would we be? All those weeks you stayed in his house or at his bedside, and you never even came close to finding out where he had hid the drum. But when I get to be a priest... Silence! Snapped the old woman. And that was all Fergie could hear. What do you suppose the old bat meant by good servants? Asked Fergie. I think she wants to turn us into zombies, gulped Johnny. Fergie looked very angry at that. Just let the old battle axe try, he growled. That had not been long after noon. Since then, Lamort had driven away from the house, had stayed away for several hours, and had returned. At twilight, he and Mama Sinestra came to tie the boys up and herd them into the icy old Ford. Hungry, frightened, and half-frozen, they jounced along as Lamort drove to the meeting place. Johnny and Fergie were low in the seat, and although he could not see much, Johnny got the idea that they were heading back toward Portsmouth. Where are you taking us? Demanded Fergie. Shut up, ordered Lamort, who was still in a mean, surly mood. Grandmère, we will soon be going through the town. Make sure these brats don't cry out. The old woman twisted around in her seat. She made some mystic signs around the air and chanted, Magic law, lockjaw, silence now rules. Freeze lungs, hold tongues, quiet these fools. Fergie made an odd choking sound, and Johnny felt his tongue and jaw turn very cold, as if he had closed his mouth on a round ball of ice. He struggled to talk, but couldn't. He panicked, because he had always been terrified of stepping on a rusty nail and getting tetanus or lockjaw. And now he thought the voodoo witch had somehow given him the disease. He struggled desperately, but managed only a soft squeak or two. You should have done better than that, complained Lamort. I still hear them. The fair one is fighting the spell, answered the old woman. She gave an evil chuckle. Let him struggle. The more he fights, the stronger the magic will grow. That, at last, made Johnny try to relax. When he did, the terrible vice that clamped his mouth shut and the invisible band that tightened on his chest both eased. He realized the spell merely kept him from crying out or screaming a warning. If he breathed slowly and regularly, he thought he might be able to whisper, so he tried to save his strength. At last, the car stopped, but the night was so dark that Johnny could not see where they were. We are early, Lamort said. I'll just get things ready for our little meeting. He climbed out of the car. Johnny heard him go around back and unlock the trunk, but he did not seem to take anything out of it. In a moment, Lamort had climbed back into the driver's seat. It won't be long, he said. Do you bring the doll? I have it here. Mama Sinestra said. Tonight, if you like, we will use it to kill the old man. He was the beginning of all our troubles. No, Grandma, Lamort said. I gave my word that we would turn over the boys and the doll if the dear professor would give us what we want. He giggled. Of course, I said nothing about what might happen after we make the exchange. So if you should find the doll of Dr. Coote lying around on the ground then, why, I wouldn't object if you wanted to stab a pin or two through the heart. Both of them laughed. Johnny's heart sank. He knew all too well that these wicked people had no intention of letting him, Fergie, the professor, or Dr. Coote live. His mind raced furiously. How could he warn the professor about what the two were plotting to do? After a few minutes, Mama Sinestra muttered, I would be glad to return once more to St. Ives, where it is warm all year. This cold hurts my old bones. We will be home again soon enough, responded Lamort. And when we are, we will use your magic to kill all those foolish rebels who thought they could overthrow Papa. Then you will teach me to wield the power of the drum and be a priest of the midnight blood, just like Papa. The old woman's voice was firm and angry as she said, Not until you are ready, my grandson. Lamort burst into belligerence. Curse you, I am ready now. I have served you for 7 years already. I want to use my power to punish those fools who have insulted and blocked me. The magic should be strong in me now. The woman snarled. Foolish boy. How am I foolish? He demanded. Didn't I take care of those 2 meddlers? Didn't I keep watch on the old man in the hospital? Didn't you tell all sorts of idiotic lies? Taunted Mama Sinestra. Saying you were a student, that you had organized a blood drive? How easily our enemies could have checked any of those imbecilic stories. You had the luck of a fool, no? No one did check, argued Lamort stubbornly. And I'm sure that I'm ready to be a priest, that I could summon a spirit just as you do, the old woman snorted. Anyone can summon a spirit with the drum, but can you control it? I think not, my grandson. If you summon the spirit without being able to direct it, it would be better for you that you had never been born. After a moment, Lamort said sullenly, If I controlled the drum, I would turn them all into zombies. Such peasants deserve to be punished even beyond death. And where are the masters again? We will, and when we are masters again, we will... Shh, said Mama Sinestra. There is a light. It must be the professor, muttered Lamort. All right, everyone out. He got out of the car and pulled the back door open. Johnny and Fergie's ankles were not tied so they could stand. It took Johnny a moment to get his bearings. The car was parked on a slushy street, but no lights showed anywhere. Then a glow came from ahead. Johnny recognized the glare of headlights, and he saw silhouetted shapes. His heart thudded. They were in another cemetery with rows of headstones all around them. A nearby grave was thick with wreaths, as if the funeral had been that very day. What had Lamort said about the place Mama Sinestra had found her poor servant? Of course, this must be the graveyard where poor Mr. DuPont had been buried. Why had the professor agreed to meet the evil sorceress and her grandson in such a place? Wait here, ordered Lamort as he reached through the driver's window and turned on the Ford's headlights. They glowed a sickly yellow and showed the snow-covered hills of the cemetery. Johnny edged slowly away from the car, and silently Fergie followed him. They did not go a great distance, just a few feet. Still, they moved to a place where they could back up against a tall, spiky monument. Johnny stretched his wrists as far apart as he could and began to rub the rope binding them against the rough stone. He could hear Fergie doing the same thing. Just keep Mama Sinestra away for a couple of minutes, he thought, and we can get free. And then what? Johnny had no idea. He just knew that he wanted desperately to get out of his bonds and to run from the despicable old woman and her treacherous grandson. Where was she anyway? Mama Sinestra had melted into the darkness, and Johnny could not tell where she might be lurking. The approaching car stopped about 50 feet away. Johnny heard doors slam, and then he saw a short figure and a tall, weedy one step into the space between the cars. His heart leaped. Although he had to lean on a cane, Dr. Coote was up and walking, and Professor Childermass was at his side. Then Johnny remembered the deadly trap the two were walking into, and he felt a wrenching stab of despair. He heard his elderly friend's raspy, cantankerous voice. All right, blast you, Lamort. Here's your package. Turn over the boys and the doll, and you can have it. Gladly, said Lamort. He turned back and said, Come on, boys. Your gallant rescuers are here. Johnny gave one last desperate rub, but he did not break through the rope. He and Fergie stumbled forward. Lamort held something up. I will put the doll in the blonde boy's jacket, he said. He unzipped Johnny's jacket and stuck the voodoo doll inside. In the light from the two cars, Johnny was able to glimpse it. The doll might have been featureless when first made, but now it was a little replica of Dr. Coote, down to his fluffy hair on the crown of his head and the horn-rimmed spectacles. All right, said Lamort. The boys will walk forward. You come to meet them, Professor. Place the drum on the road when you get to them. Then back up with them, but no more than 10 feet. When I have the drum and have returned to my car, you may leave. Johnny heard Fergie straining, but all his friend could do was make desperate little noises. The freezing enchantment was still holding Johnny's tongue, too, though he desperately wanted to shout a warning. Very well, said Professor Childermass. Here I come. Boys, said Lamort, go join your friends, but walk slowly. Johnny and Fergie walked almost in step through the slushed snow as the professor came forward to meet them. He had a bundle under his arms. When they were very close, Lamort cried, Stop! I want to see the drum. The professor held the bundle up. It was wrapped in oilcloth. Dramatically, he unwrapped it. The hateful little drum was inside, its ebony-colored body gleaming dully in the glare of the car headlights. There, said Professor Childermass. Is that what you want, you snake in the grass? It is, said Lamort. Put down the drum and then back away with the boys. I am coming to get our property. The professor carefully rewrapped the drum and set it down. Come along, gentlemen, he said. We're almost out of this. Johnny and Fergie went to join him. They backed away. Lamort came cautiously forward, picked up the drum, and retreated toward his car, unwrapping the package. He laughed in a wild, triumphant way when he held the drum in his hands. You fools, he shouted. Now, Grandmere, release the zombie. Behind Johnny, Dr. Coote cried out in alarm. Professor Childermass seized Johnny and Fergie's shoulders and spun them around so they could run for the safety of his Pontiac. Too late. A plodding, shambling figure had broken into the light from behind Dr. Coote. It stalked toward them, cutting off their escape. Johnny strained again at his bonds, and they snapped. He must have worn the rope almost completely through against the granite monument. With a careless swipe of its arms, the zombie shoved Professor Childermass aside, and he went tumbling down. Fergie staggered away from the creature, but lost his footing and fell to his knees. Somewhere to the left, a pipe played a weird tune, and the zombie's head swung blindly toward the struggling boy. The figure stooped and seized Fergie and swung him up over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. Then the zombie blundered toward Johnny. Johnny ran, his heart exploding with terror. So that was what Mama Sinestra meant. She and Lamort would kill Dr. Coote and the professor and make zombies out of him and Fergie. Lamort stepped to intercept him, but Johnny swerved around beside the ford. He slipped and fell. His hands sloshed through the slushy snow as he tried to catch himself. The rope burns on his wrist suddenly stung as though he had rubbed alcohol into them. Alcohol or salt. Salt was the one thing that could break the spell animating a zombie. What had the professor said? In New Hampshire they threw salt all over the roads. The fresh grave meant that the cemetery drive had been sprinkled with rock salt. Johnny grabbed a double handful of slush and spun. The zombie was almost on top of him. He would only have one chance. Desperately he threw the slushy snowball as hard as he could. Splat! It connected. The slush splashed across the zombie's face. It dripped from the creature's cheekbones and chin and nose. It must have dribbled into its open mouth. The figure stopped. Fergie kicked himself loose and fell to the ground with a whomp. As Johnny watched fearfully, the zombie's black, dead tongue came out and licked its black, dead lips. Then the black eyes smoldered with awareness and hatred. The zombie turned and lurched away into the darkness. Where are you going? Shouted Lamort. Grandmere, what is wrong? The pipes played frantically. The zombie growled a harsh, awful, inhuman sound. From ahead of it, in the dark, came the terrified scream of Mama Sinestra. No, keep away, I command you. Help me, not into the grave, I order you. No, my grandson, help me. The screech faded into an awful wail and then silence. Johnny staggered and gasped as an invisible fist loosed its hold on him. His frozen mouth suddenly felt hot, as if he had taken a gulp of scalding tea. I can talk, he said. Joy of joys, growled the sopping wet Fergie, who had staggered to his knees. Help me up, Dixon, and get these ropes off me. It had all taken just a moment. Professor Childermass had risen too. He was stalking toward Lamort, with Dr. Coote close behind him, brandishing his cane like a club. "Now," thundered the professor, "by heavens, sir, defend yourself. I'll teach you to play such a shabby trick." His eyes wide, Lamort thumped the drum in a broken rhythm. I summon thee, Lord of the Dead," he cried. "Come and help thy servant." Johnny blinked as the air in front of Lamort grew dark and solid. A terrible figure shimmered there. A figure with a skull face and a top hat and a shabby torn frock coat. Baron Samedi himself had come to answer the drumbeat, but something was dreadfully wrong. Slowly the immense form turned to face the man who held the black drum. Slowly he reached out a skeletal hand for Lamort. The young man screamed in terror as the bony fingers entered his chest. Johnny groaned, but he could not tear his eyes away from the grisly scene. He saw no wound, no blood. The ghastly fingers of the Baron passed right through Lamort's body, as if it were made of mist or water. Then Lamort reeled as the living skeleton's hand came out again, clenched into a fist. Something glowing golden yellow, something like a huge frantic moth, struggled and fluttered in that clenched cage of bone, and then the fingers crunched shut and the light died. Lamort dropped the drum and fell in a heap, babbling senselessly. The enormous skeleton reared to its full height and slowly vanished, fading into the darkness of the night. What happened?" gasped Fergie. Dr. Coote came slowly up, leaning on his cane. "He was not an initiated priest," murmured the old man, looking down at Lamort with a strange sort of pity. "The Lord of the Dead turned against him and plucked his soul right out of his body. This miserable wretch will be what he tried to make you, a mindless, helpless, soulless zombie." And that is the end of chapter 14.